Let's begin this morning. Thanks for putting up with me not being here a couple weeks ago. I'm still moving through whatever this is. Doc said that she had exactly the same thing I have, and it took her 3 weeks to get over this thing. So, I'm kind of on the backside of week 2. So let's see if we can, next week will be much better. We are affectionately calling this the crud. So there you go. There are times, by the way, in this class I really feel like I've missed my calling as a stand-up comic. So, oh my word. If Robin were here, she'd be fist pumping like this. My greatest thrill every day of my life is to see if I can get my wife to laugh. If I get her to belly laugh, this is just a high for me. Usually my jokes, roll off the end of a table and explode in front of me. And if I get an eye roll, that's pretty much where that's going. The eye roll is as good as it usually gets. But if I get her to chuckle, oh my word, made my day. So thanks, Mike, for playing substitute this morning. Robin is away for the weekend. Oh, dear. Well, let's begin with prayer. Lord, thanks again for your word, for what it teaches us and how to live, not just what to know, but how to live. And help us, Lord, to appropriate these things this morning. Amen. Well, I have long been a believer. You guys are going to kick me out of the PCA. I've long been a believer that rock musicians should really have their day in preaching behind pulpits. And this is one of them. Bob Seger from Detroit. Some of you love a tune like this. I used to show these kinds of things to my students when I was teaching in high school. And do you remember the old Chevy commercial? Like a rock, they'd sing this thing, and they'd have the Chevy go by and all this kind of stuff. And I would always say to my students, what they never show you is the last stanza of this song. So check this out. Stood there boldly, sweating in the sun, felt like a million, felt like number one. The height of summer, I'd never felt that strong, like a rock. I'm 18, I didn't have a care, working for peanuts, not a dime to spare, but I was lean and solid everywhere, like a rock. My hands were steady, my eyes were clear and bright, my walk had purpose, my steps quick and light, and I held firmly to what I felt was right, like a rock. Like a rock, I was strong as I could be, like a rock, nothing ever got to me, like a rock. I was something to see, like a rock. You know what's coming, don't you? Here's Bob today. Okay, just so y'all know. All right, he's still kicking up in Detroit. All right, 75. And I stood arrow straight, unencumbered by the weight of all those hustlers and their schemes. I stood proud, I stood tall, high above it all. I still believed in my dreams. 20 years now, where'd they go? 20 years, I don't know. I sit and I wonder sometimes where they've gone. Yeah, baby, that's exactly right. And it sounds vaguely like the Bible, just somewhere in there. I think Bob got his inspiration from the book of Ecclesiastes. So this is what we're after today. We're talking about youth and age. And by age, I mean getting up there. People with white hair like me. So when we're talking about these things, we really have to emphasize this concept that we are living in the past lane. Living in the past lane. Solomon erects billboards along the highway of life to let us know what's ahead. His point, there are no second chances to live. Live it well, live it right. And if you're thinking about you can wait till later, let me tell you what later will be like. There is no going back. There is no reverse in life. I've had students 20 years past the time I had them in class, call, email, text, whatever, get together, conversation. And they would say to me, I thought you were full of it when I was 18. And, I've gone 20 years now. I mean, it's just like Bob Seger. I've gone 20 years, and I've wasted 20 years. But I've just come to Christ. Christ has saved me. I wasn't a believer when I was in your classes. I want to apologize, and all of those kinds of things kids say. Well, kids now into their 40s. And I remember this one guy who said, I've wasted all of these years. I wish I could get them back. And my response to him was, you have from now. So don't waste now. Start now. The past is the past, yeah, okay. New slate, wipe it clean, let's move. What can we do to help that process down the road? So encourage people. I tell you that little bit of a story just to simply say, to encourage people. If they have taken the big left-hand turn, as I like to say, the way of Cain, Genesis chapter 4, some people do that, but they come back, some do. So encourage the coming back. And along the way, by the way, encourage them still in the process of getting back. Don't write them off. Don't ever write anybody off, ever. Stay with them. And people come to me and they'll say, my son, my daughter, my kids, what do I do? And I'll say to them, love them. Just keep loving them. Because when the time comes and they want a place to come back to, they're going to come back to you because you loved them. All right, sorry, I was preaching there a minute. All right, so let's get to what Ecclesiastes says there. Sometimes I don't know what possesses me. I think I need a pulpit up here or something. Or as they say in the black church, my pulpit. Which reminds me, this week, this is what sickness does to you. It kind of warps your brain, I was teaching in class at IUPUI, and I was talking about rhetoric and what rhetoric means. You speak to an audience in a way they hear you in that particular occasion. And I was showing them that great scene I love out of City Hall with Al Pacino. He goes to a black church and preaches at the funeral of a little black boy, told not to go. But he immediately goes into call and response, which is black preaching. And the crescendo and then the valley, and the crescendo and the valley. And it's marvelous. I still get chills up and down my spine thinking about that. And then I went on to say, have you ever been to a black church? Nobody raised their hand. I have black students in my class. Nobody go to church. So I said, let me tell you what it's like. I've preached in black churches, had the honor to do so. And this is exactly what you do. And so when you're there, it's call and response. You crescendo and you come back down again. And we're about to see some of this crescendo, especially here in the first part of Ecclesiastes 11:7. We'll start reading there, ESV. Light is sweet, it's pleasant to the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart. Put away pain from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. So here he's kind of beginning to land the plane in Ecclesiastes. He's talked about all of these issues that are vanity, emptiness. And he's getting now down to age. And he's saying, just before I talk to you about the final thing, which we'll talk about next week, I want you to know what it's like to live life as a young person and then as an old person. So my point here about the on-ramp of youth, this is where you're just getting started and getting going. There are some speed limits that come along the way. So the light and the sun refer to pleasures in life. By the way, these things are picked up again later on in the same context where the light and the sun don't shine, which is a reference to getting older and age. The good and the sweet savored with enthusiasm. So all of this stuff is really good at the moment. These are good things, good times. Bob Seger's first part of his song is right. I'm like a rock, man. I feel good. Feel good when you're young. Now, there's lots of benefits to youth. Here are just a few of them. You have the benefit of time because you've got a lot to go, which is a good thing. Lots of opportunities. You can go in so many different directions. There's joy to be had here. We'll talk more about this. Strength, the strength that I no longer have, but young people do. and the seriousness with which you need to remember your Creator in the days of your youth. So these are some of the keys and the highlights to what it means to be young. Along with the on-ramp, there are also some speed bumps. So we've got the sun and the light, and we're savoring everything with enthusiasm. But Solomon also says, yeah, it's good to be alive, but serve God while you're young because there are no second chances. So for those of you who may not know, I started preaching when I was 13. I started filling pulpits when I was 16. So I've been speaking for a long time. My mom, who was concerned about my mental development because I didn't speak until the age of 3, she said, as soon as you started talking, you wouldn't shut up. So, there it is. Don't worry about late talkers. Thomas Sowell actually wrote a book on late talkers, by the way, if you have issues or concerns about those things. You've probably heard me talk about Thomas a little bit in this class. But these are the kinds of things that you have in a book of Ecclesiastes. The stuff that I was dealing with when I was 16, the kind of home that I grew up in, and the difficulties of that life, I was looking for answers to questions like everybody else was in my time, early 1970s when I was in high school. By the way, I was voted class individual, which is really quite something when I stopped to think about it, until I remember that the girl who was voted class individual was voted so because she was high on marijuana all the time. So I don't know, that my being voted class individual is such a cool thing. But the reason why was because I was always preaching. So I was telling everybody about Jesus on the football team, on the lacrosse team, and that was, what I was known for. My tagline, or my nom de plume, the name that everybody called me was Padre, because I wouldn't stop preaching. So that's what it was true for me. When I think about this, I think about finding Francis Schaeffer when I was 16, and all of the stories that go along with that, the apologetics emphasis that started for me and when I was 16 to 18. So these kinds of things started very early for me, and they've continued. That doesn't mean it's going to be the same for everybody. But it certainly was true for me in the youth issue of having these opportunities to begin early. So for those of you who have kids who are just starting out, be encouraged by the opportunities that they might have to begin their life early and remembering their Creator in the days of their youth. But there are some, like this man, Mr. Jones, who wrote, "Across the fields of yesterday he sometimes comes to me, a little lad just back from play, the lad I used to be. And yet he smiles so wistfully once he has crept within. I wonder if he hopes to see the man I might have been." Do we have regrets? Yep. Are there things that we wish we would have done? Yep. Are there things we wish we wouldn't have done? Oh, yeah. So when we stop to consider this and we're thinking about these kinds of ideas, these are the things that are necessary for us in our communication with young people. So from one of my favorite essays of all time, this is C.S. Lewis, Learning During Wartime. This was a speech he gave in 1942 in the middle of the Blitzkrieg in London. This is what he said: "A man's upbringing, his talents, his circumstances, index his vocation. If our parents have sent us to school, if our country allows us to remain there, this is evidence that the life which we can best lead to the glory of God at present is the learned life." Oh, my word. If you ever get a chance to read this essay, it comes out of the book, The Weight of Glory. If you're a Lewis fan, you know that book. Learning During Wartime. Fantastic essay. Should we ever stop learning? No. Should we learn even during very difficult times? Absolutely. In fact, double down on it. Because learning during suffering is really what the key to life is, quite honestly. But this is a great reminder for all of us, the benefits of our opportunity to be in school. Yeah, I'll talk more about that. So here we have in verses 8 and 9 this, again, almost this call and response idea. Let him rejoice, but remember. Let him rejoice, but know. So here you have the young woman, and here you have the old woman. Because this young woman is going to be that old woman someday. And that old woman, as she looks wistfully out of her window, remembers the days when she was this young woman. This is not to be lightly gone over. I want to emphasize this because there are some of us who are closer to the end than we are to the beginning. And that's just being honest about life. I'm not trying to be morbid or negative or anything. I'm just trying to say this is what Ecclesiastes is telling us. So understand that when you're old, you should be able to look back on the greatness of life that you've had an opportunity to live. And when you're young, you need to be preparing toward that day when you're old and you have this opportunity to look back. And I'm speaking now in general terms. I'm not discounting the awfulnesses of life and the difficulties that happen in Oxford, Michigan, of all places. I'm not discounting any of those things. But what I am suggesting is that these are general ideals of life. So, I wish I had a nickel for every time I've said this to students. This will be the last time that somebody will pay your light bill, put food in your belly, give you a free education. I used to preach this, when I was teaching in high school, even now, and I remember just saying this a few weeks ago at IUPOI. This is the last time your parents are going to take care of you. Because you know what you're going to be doing the rest of your life? Long vocal pause. Working. Working. You know what you have the opportunity to do now? Learning. Learning. Free from the encumbrances. Yeah, don't get me started. So these are the kinds of things that are really important for us to stress. Now, of course, as a parent, it's harder for you sometimes to actually say this to your own kid. Just give me a call. I'll come over and let them know. All right? That'll be the way we'll go with that. So I've spent most of my adult life around teenagers, including today. I still teach freshmen at IUPUI. And for as long as I've been teaching, I've been talking to them about the boss. I'm telling you, rock musicians, man, this is great. I had a friend who was a big baseball player back in high school. He could throw that speedball by you and make you look like a fool. Saw him the other night at this roadside bar. I was walking in, he was walking out. We went back inside, sat down, had a few drinks. And all he kept talking about was glory days. Well, they'll pass you by, glory days, in the wink of a young girl's eye, glory days. There's the boss. You ready to see the boss now? There's the boss now. Think I'm going down to the well tonight. I'm going to drink till I get my fill. I hope when I get old I don't sit around thinking about it, but I probably will. Yeah, just sitting back trying to recapture a little of the glory of. Well, time slips away and leaves you with nothing, mister, but boring stories of glory days. Man, I cannot tell you. I would put the words up on the screen. Back in the day, we had the overhead projector. For those of you who might not know, I'll show you on my phone later on. What the old days were like. But then I'd play the song. I'd play Bruce, And this is fantastic stuff to help kids to get the point. And maybe they're singing songs about this now. I don't keep up with music as much as I do with movies. But these songs, man, they're forever. They're really important things. So, a couple of weeks ago, I was supposed to be here and teach, but I was feverish and fluish. So I decided to give you a snapshot of what I was going to say then. So if you flip over your handout to the back side of this, and then I'm going to read for you the first 6 verses of chapter 11, because it really ties in nicely to the context of what Solomon is talking about concerning youth. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. If a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will be. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes into the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you don't know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. And that's the precursor to what I just read a few moments ago from 11:7 and on. So what we have here is this opportunity that we help young people to see these are the things yet to come, the opportunities you have that you can do something with. Now, I've highlighted some of the baseline ideas here, but you'll notice I've kind of captured the essence of it all in that box at the top. Life is not a crapshoot. God has planned circumstances and the people involved, but we can't know God's sovereign control of time and events, including death. So we ought to live every day to the fullest, accomplishing every action with diligence, because we never know, 4 times in those 6 verses, if success will follow. So the idea here is really a powerful one, and notice down in the first section there in Cast Off, verses 1 and 2, in Solomon's day, this idea of cast your bread upon the waters meant a shipping industry. So trade, Solomon's ships brought back gold, silver, ivory, gorillas, peacocks, 1 Kings 10:22 tells us. There's an investment over time. Ships did not return immediately. There was no ROI. It took me the longest time to figure out what in the world everybody was talking about, ROI. That's return on investment. It takes humanities people a long time to get the numbers thing going. So just a couple of stories along that way. I tell my students about my favorite writing books, the people that are the great writers who write great writing books. Louie Lamora is one of them. He wrote a book called The Education of a Wandering Man. And in that book, he talks about how when he got a rejection notice in the mail for all of the stuff he was sending off trying to get into print, as soon as he got a rejection notice, he'd send out a new mailing to somebody else to see if he could submit and sell his work someplace. I think about that when I think about, it took me 25 times before my first article was ever published back in 1990. And it took a long time to get that going, 25 rejection notices. But then I talked with my friend who's on our board, Janelle Howard, and she said, I asked her to come over to talk with my students. She works for DOD, Department of Defense, about business and the importance of written communication. And she said, I sent my resume to DOD 350 times. It was finally accepted on 350th time. My 25 times pales in significance to such perseverance. She took full advantage of the opportunities. She's brilliant in what she does, just fantastic testimony for the Lord as well. So this idea down toward the bottom, I'm not going to read everything, you can read these things, where I write about the broadcast in verses 5 to 6, make hay while the sun shines. That's an old proverb, but it's really true. There should be no procrastination and no pessimism, because 3 times it says you don't know. If you don't understand the processes of what makes you think you're going to understand the processes for your individual life. If you don't know where the wind comes from, if you don't know how a baby is formed in the womb, how are you going to figure out what your opportunities will benefit or not in the future? Take them. Use them now, because they're not going to come back again. So, wanted to make sure to say that. Another benefit of youth is strength. We read this earlier, 11:10. When Solomon says, remove vexation from your heart, pain from your body, for you in the dawn of life are vanity, he means one's youth goes rapidly. Do what you do now when you don't have physical restrictions, so that later you don't have emotional regrets. So that's the emphasis here about what does it mean to do this now, to enjoy it now. Another favorite of mine, Jacques Ellul, talk a long time about his works, but he wrote a book, A Meditation on Ecclesiastes. And this is what he said: the time of youth, remember its blossoming of happiness and pleasure. Remembering will point us to the Creator. We simply need to recognize that all these things constitute a gift from Him. While you're in your glory, turn your glorious face toward the one who created you. All your happiness comes from Him. Next, you'll find praise on your lips, thanksgiving, and a hymn to God's joy in you. What a great statement from Jacques Ellul, one of those 20th century French Christian apologists. The benefits of youth is joy. So just last night, actually, I got home. This is very unlike Mark. Mark does not do late night. Mark had to take a nap yesterday so that Mark could be up as late as I was up. So there was this meeting I was invited to. It went from 8:30 to 11:30. Yeah, and it was in the city, so there's a half hour on the other side of that. But it was really great, and I was thankful for the invitation because I got to meet an IUPUI prof that I had never met before. big name on campus. His name is Richard Gunderson. Perhaps you've heard of that name in the medical field. He teaches medical ethics. Well, one of the things that we were discussing last night when it was my turn to speak, and I was kind of echoing what Richard was saying, was when the question of medical ethics comes up, what do you do? And I told them I tell stories. And I tell my students to tell stories. So then I started talking about Branton Yancey's book, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, in His Image, Pain, the Gift Nobody Wants. If you've never read those, don't know what those are, make sure to check those out. Basically, those are stories. He's telling stories about how you treat people. So one of the big discussion points last night was the issue of abiding by principles. So you set up all these principles, and then you look at the situation of the individual and you ask yourself the question, which one of these principles fits that situation? Instead, what we ought to be doing is we ought to be looking at the individual and letting the individual tell us. You know, set the principles off to the side. Doesn't mean the principles are bad or wrong. It's just you're not listening to the person. So listen to the person and let them tell you their story. That's huge. So, youth and dawn of life, one of those phrases here. This dawn of life, I got to tell you, in the ESV, I don't like this translation because the word there literally means dark or dark hair. So when you stop to think about in your youth, you have dark hair. You don't have white hair like I have. This is a time, the Hebrew word there also means vigor. So it's a time of black hair. So remember, whenever you're studying the Bible, by the way, this is a short course on hermeneutics. There are 3 major issues in hermeneutics. Write these down, they're very important. Number 1, context. Number 2, context. Number 3, context. Yeah, the context of this is about youth and age, okay? So don't mess around with the text here. Under the sun, too soon old, too late smart. I wish I had another nickel for as many times as my father told me that. And this is what young people need. When I think about youth, I think about catechism. So I wrote a catechism for my son. And then ended up using it when I was teaching in Christian high school. This is what I think young people need, is catechesis, it's called in Latin. And the idea is that you train people to think doctrinally. So you give them questions which have biblical answers, which is a very powerful way, I think, to teach and important. But along with this, telling stories. So the seriousness, remembering God. Another favorite here, Simone Weil. She wrote an essay entitled Reflections on the Right Use of School Studies with a View to the Love of God. We need to acknowledge our studies are sacraments of God. Remember, Hebrews 13:15 says that everything is a gift, so all of these things that we're giving back to God. When I teach, my teaching is a gift given back to God. Studies offer discipline of concentration, which in turn enables the believer to wait attentively for God to speak. And this is what Simone Weil said, every school exercise is a sacrament. I've always thought that the best place to have communion is in a science lab. You know, you get to see the wonder and the beauty and the awe and the wow. Man, what better time to break out the bread and the wine? Well, maybe not the wine for kids, but you know where I'm going with this. The emphasis, of course, is the seriousness of this. Take seriously your studies. Take seriously life. So, again, this is the kind of idea that I highlight to students when they tell me that they're bored. So this is some of what I have written to them. Every single piece of knowledge we consider, every page read, every problem solved, every multiple choice question answered, every lecture attended, every website accessed, everything we learn is another opportunity to thank God for His good gift of education. If we consider our responsibility in that way, never again should we say that class is boring or I can't wait to be done with school. Every day in school, we are adding more building blocks to the interiority of our person in honor of our personal Creator. By the way, if anybody wants me to teach this at the youth, with youth, let me know. We'll make that happen. Benefits of youth. Take this thing seriously because it ain't coming again, baby. It ain't coming again. So the off-ramp, old age. Oh, you're going to love this. Y'all know where this is going anyway, right? So we already kind of gave you a little bit of a taste of this at the end of verse 1, where it says, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds or return after rain. Remember what I talked about, the sun and the light before now gets dark. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, the strong men bent, the grinders cease because they're few. And those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors of the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of the song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. Man, I get a big smile every time I read this passage. So here's what we're talking about here. Notice I already mentioned this, the light fades to darkness, the fading of joy. The benefits of youth is joy, but the detriments of age are no joy. So we see no joy in what we're doing. So notice this. This is, by the way, as always, all this stuff is on your notes. You don't have to write anything down. Keepers of the house, the arms and the hands, strong men of the legs and knees, the grinders of the teeth, the windows are the eyes, the doors are the lips and mouth, the sound of, this is where I wish Robin were here. Man, she gets after me all the time. You need to go get your hearing checked. And my response is always the same. You need to speak up. Yeah. So but it's really cool because this passage exactly summarizes what I go through all the time. The slightest noise wakes me up, but I cannot hear the woman when she's speaking to me. And she's right there, Anyway. They're afraid of what's high. This is acrophobia. Of course, I've had this for a long time, but we're talking about when you get older, you don't want to go up high because you're afraid you're going to fall down or fall off or just fall. Terrors in the streets, fear of falling and leaving home. It was really hard for me last night to go to this meeting because I am such a homebody. I like my books. I like to study. I like to read. And I got to go see people, I'm teasing. Almond tree, white hair. See the white hair? There you go. The grasshopper. Have you ever seen a grasshopper walk? So the gait looks crippled. Okay? Grasshoppers are pretty cool when they fly, but not so much when they walk. Desire, sexual desire and power. Your desire for power is lost or it's dissipated. Eternal home has to do with the cemetery because this is where people thought that you went. This is where you died. You were placed in a cave or a cavern. Mourners in the streets are the funeral. The silver cord is the spinal column. Golden bowl is the brain. The pitcher is the heart. The wheel is circulation. And dust spirit is material and immaterial. There are lots of other interpretations of this. Remember my 3 words about hermeneutics, context, context, context. Can I be just outright with this? This is the proper interpretation, okay? I'm just saying that right now. Not messing around with anybody else's interpretation. Okay, here we go. Now, just for a laugh, since we haven't been laughing at all during our period of time here, I wanted to suggest to you some book titles that I've been coming up with for a long time concerning aging. Gray hair, no hair, ear hair. Why do nursing and funeral end in home? Did you ever think about some of these things? This is what Mark does when he has free time. He thinks about this. Sags, bags, and other body parts. When I was your age and other tall tales, you know how it is when you get old and you start telling these stories that never really happened. They didn't happen, and you are just exacerbating whatever little piece of truth there is in there, My move from orange juice to prune juice. Better to be over the hill than under it. How I got to be 60 and other atrocities. And experience is the best teacher if only I could remember. So there you go. There are some of Mark's ideas for books now that I'm this age. But I've been thinking about these things for a long time, you might imagine. This just popped in my mind. If you've never read the book, When I'm Old, I'll Wear Purple.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's just so cool. Man, that woman rocks, man. She's great. Okay. So I deal, as I've suggested, I've been teaching high school students and now freshmen in college for a very long time. And whenever students come to me and they'll talk with me about, I'm concerned about my grade, I will always, are you concerned about what you're learning in this class? Do you realize that the stuff I'm teaching you here is for life? I'm giving you life lessons. You should never forget these lessons. So they're all concerned about these things, and everybody seems to be, this is their focal point in education. But those of you who have been out for a while know that this isn't all that there is in life. That there's a lot more. Now, don't get me wrong. Now, I'm not discounting any of that. I'm an educator. I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah, stuff matters. But this isn't the end all. This isn't it. This is it. If you want that's it, the fear of the Lord. You start there. So questions to consider for church and home. Youth, do we ever think of learning as joy? That's just a... Do we get young people to get to that place where we get them to think, wow, I'm just so happy I'm in school? Those of us who are aged, do we ever share our learning with youth? Do you ever come alongside anybody that's, decades younger than you and say, hey, if you ever want to, I'll be happy to, or just invite them out. Take them someplace and they'll love it. Youth, do we say, I do my homework to the glory of God? I have in all my years never heard any student say that, ever. They do their athletics to the glory of God or fill in the blank to the glory of God, but not their homework. You can tell that still ruffles me a little, can't you? Aged, do we tell stories how our education benefited others? In our youth, do we think of exercising our minds as much as we exercise our bodies? When we're aged, have we developed catechisms for our youth? Youth, do we remember that wisdom begins with fearing God? And when we're old, have we developed an ethnography for teaching? Ethnography means the writing or the study of what it means to get your story down on paper. So for those of us who have been along in years, we need to write our memoirs. So I'm still in the process of writing mine. I was going to write it in 2016. I'm glad I didn't because now I've got this whole public university thing going on. And I'm really happy for those opportunities and the many stories that are now going to be in that book. But we need to tell these stories so that people coming after us can hear these stories. So I'll end with this. I was in conversation, a quick email conversation this week with one of my former profs, my favorite prof of all time. He was so cool, man. He would come to see, he taught at a conservative evangelical seminary and rode a Harley. And the joy on his face. I mean, just such a cool guy. And some of us believe that coffee, not blood, ran through his veins. He drank so much of it. But we were emailing back and forth this week. And I had sent him a story I'd written about him. And he said, I'm 76 now, and my wife's getting frail, and so on. So we just a little bit back and forth. And it just struck me, he can't be 76. He can't be 76. And he's just, he's leaving where he's teaching now because the time has come. Man, I don't know if I could summarize anything any better than what I've already said here. Don't waste it. Take every opportunity. Consider the future. Consider what it's going to be to teach other people to come after you. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who. All of that kind of stuff. All right. Comments, questions, thoughts?
I'm curious, without getting too personal about your conversation last night, but in a broader sense, the thought of storytelling. How do you see that being received in different fields?
How is storytelling received in different fields? Well, I'll tell you that when I'm teaching, students listen. I mean, there's just no two ways about that. Kids love stories. Adults love stories. I was in another meeting. This is a couple of years ago at IUPUI, and we were discussing the opportunity to do some interdisciplinary studies. And somebody mentioned, that in the medical field that Frankenstein would be a good book to read. And I said, oh, I've taught a whole series on Gothic horror literature, and they all kind of look at me like, yeah, just stay over there. But those kinds of things, I think, are really valuable. Last night, a surgeon came up to me and he said, what books should I read? And I said, well, I mentioned Gothic horror literature, Frankenstein, Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, Island of Dr. Moreau, Dorian Gray. But then I mentioned dystopian literature, 1984, those kinds of things, Orwell, Bradbury, Wells. And I said, these guys are looking at the future and they're going, okay, this is what could happen if we don't take care of this now. So when you read dystopian literature, you're asking yourself the question, what should I be doing right now that isn't getting done? And those are the kinds of books, I think, that spur people on. And just one final comment. When I'm talking with faculty members in my department at IUPUI, they don't want to hear John 3:16. They want to hear literature. So I speak to them in literature. And I talk with them about the things that I've been reading or the essays that I've written, those kinds of things. When I was going through study there, and went back to get that degree in English, one of my courses I took was from Jane Schultz, brilliant Civil War historian, literary critic, amazing woman. I got the last course she ever taught there. I was so pleased. And my final project was the theological foundations for the abolitionist movement during the Civil War. And I asked her ahead of time, because she does not go theologically. And she gave me the opportunity to go ahead with that. She said, but you have to tie it to literature. So I tied it to Frederick Douglass and then Angelina Grimke. And it got published. It was peer-reviewed, published in a journal. And I remember writing to her after I found out it was getting published. And I said, I just want you to know that the final project for your class, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity because this thing has now been published. She immediately wrote back and said, it's the best news I've had in months. You see, people in university, they care about three things. They care about your degrees, they care about how you publish, and they care about your teaching. And when you can demonstrate that to them, then you have a voice on the campus. And that really matters. So there's just kind of a flurry of different kinds of story elements that get to answer your question about the importance of story and other capacities. We've gone way past our time here. Thanks ever so much. We'll conclude the Ecclesiastes series next week. Read ahead to the end if you'd like.